I'm excited that you're here, and you are going to be super jazzed when you listen to the special guest that I have today. His name is Colin Carr, and he is a specialist in real estate, but not the kind of real estate you would think, like buying a house. He actually works with healthcare practitioners to help them negotiate leases and or purchase commercial real estate. Now, I know you might be thinking, oh, here we go, some slimy guy. I actually was really impressed with my conversation with him. I enjoyed the whole thing. I learned a lot, found out that I probably lost a lot of money. I was kind of the sucker they were looking for. Yeah, you'll hear all about it in the show. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Colin Carr. Welcome to the Clinical Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Rhonda, your no fluff, tell it like it is business bestie for wellness practitioners just like you who want to build a practice you love and make a bigger impact and a little money while you're at it. So if you're ready to ditch the overwhelm, attract your dream, ideal patients, and finally run your practice with complete confidence, you're in the right place. Each week, we're tackling things from programs to patient retention to marketing strategies that actually work, sprinkled, of course, with a little sass, a lot of heart, and the step-by-step strategies that will help you get there. So grab your cup of coffee, your notebook, or whatever keeps you going, and let's build a practice you love and a life you love together. Well, hi, Colin. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad that you're here. You are a new friend of mine, new person to the podcast. So welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. I was very intrigued and interested in your topic when I got an email, I think from your assistant or someone, and they said, Colin specializes in leases and real estate for healthcare practices. I was like, well, how about that for a niche? I thought that was pretty great. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into this type of work.
Absolutely. So our company specializes, we're commercial real estate only. We are healthcare only, and we only work on the tenant and buyer side. So in this case, it's healthcare practices, dentists, physicians, veterinarians, therapists, anything that's healthcare related, we specialize in. And as opposed to most real estate brokers, they want the listing. They want to work for the landlord or the seller. They want their sign in front of the property. They're negotiating against the healthcare practice. We are only on the healthcare practices side. So I started the company almost 17 years ago, and it was basically the culmination of me working on the landlord or seller side and seeing just how badly healthcare practices were being taken advantage of. So if we rewind, I've been doing real estate since I was 19 years old. I've been doing brokerage since I was 22, so it's all I've ever done professionally. And I just started doing a lot of healthcare, and I started working for some of the largest healthcare landlords and REITs in the country. And the culmination of this was I had a multi-building medical campus that was owned by the largest medical landlord in the country. And we had a series of doctors who had spaces who had leases coming up for renewal. And I met with each one of them, talked to them about the market. None of them had representation. None of them knew what was possible if they were able to negotiate. None of them knew the market. None of them knew what they should or shouldn't be saying or doing. And long story short, this is going back now like 18 years ago, the landlord just absolutely crushed these doctors, and they had no idea. And when I say crush, what I mean is these doctors paid like $400,000, $500,000 more than they should have on their 10-year renewals. They missed out on 6 figures of concessions. They could have gotten their spaces fully renovated with Class A finishes. On the landlord, didn't get anything. They could have gotten large free rent packages like 4 or 5 months free for signing a 10-year lease. They got no free rent. They could have got their operating expense, what we call base years, reset so that they weren't getting hammered on operating expenses. Didn't get any concessions there.
Wow.
And then every one of them was paying an above market lease rate, not by a small amount, by large margins. And so, I had a couple of those deals that happened, and I'd always done a lot of landlord work. I did tenant and buyer work, but I did a lot of landlord work, and I was used to this. I was used to landlords want the best terms, no different than tenants want the best terms. But these couple transactions that happened in a short period of time just didn't sit well with me, and I just realized this is a really unfair fight. And unlike a lot of other industries, I had done a lot of retail as well and stuff for like large national retailers. They always had representation.
Right, right.
Sadly, business owners like CPAs, attorneys, they always had representation. For some reason, like with the healthcare practices, these doctors just kept showing up by themselves, doing it themselves, the DIY approach. And so after a couple of those deals happened, just for me, it just didn't feel right anymore. And so I decided to start this company where we would only represent them, only advocate on their behalf. And that was, again, almost 17 years ago now. And we are now in all 50 states. And we have, I think as of this morning, we have almost 6,000 healthcare practices that we're representing as we speak, coast to coast with the real estate.
No kidding. Well, good on you. Like, how great is that? I love that. And, I never really thought about that because it's true. Like, I have been in several different spaces and I just show up, read the lease and think, oh, okay, well, I can afford that, or maybe it's a little bit high, but I think, oh, it's a little steep, but I could probably grow into it. And then, something happens, things get rough, economy goes bad, or there's some repair in the building and they're like, oh yeah, well, that's not even covered in your lease. That's completely on you, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't even know you existed. So I'm so happy that you're here. What are the biggest gotchas that healthcare practitioners should be aware of? Like, what are the things that very commonly we fall for that we shouldn't?
Yeah, absolutely. So I could give you probably more than we have time to cover. I'll give you like the top 3 or 4. The first one, it's basically a recap what I just said, but it's the number one mistake. It's the do-it-yourself approach. There's no large national companies, no Fortune 500 companies that have some random person who operates in the business doing the real estate transactions that's not trained there. So Starbucks doesn't show up and have somebody who works inside of a Starbucks like operating the coffee shop, like negotiating leases.
Right. Right.
Chase Bank doesn't have somebody who like sells loans.
A teller, yeah.
They don't do that. And so like pick your retailer, pick your office user, pick your industrial user. Nobody operates that way. But for some reason in healthcare, the doctors, the healthcare practices, and even like the office administrators, they're very intelligent people. They're not trained in commercial real estate. So the DIY approach, it just does not happen in other forms of real estate. And there's a reason, because there's too much on the line. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake that healthcare providers or practices make is when they do it themselves or when they hire an agent, a lot of times they'll only negotiate on one property at a time. And that is exactly the opposite of how commercial real estate is done. Again, going back to how the largest companies in the world do it. And what I mean by that is, and most people probably can relate to this if you've done a residential transaction, you bought a house. In residential real estate, you go to the market, you look online, you work with an agent. When you find a property you'd like, you submit an offer, and it's usually in a contract format. When the seller says, yes, I'll accept those terms, you're under contract. It's a legally binding document. In commercial real estate, you negotiate on what's called a non-binding LOI, letter of intent, or an RFP, a request for proposal. And in commercial real estate, you're not just submitting an offer and they're saying yes, and then you're under contract. You're going back and forth a lot of times 3 or 4 rounds of negotiations. And it's very common to negotiate with 3 or 4 landlords or sellers simultaneously because there's too many variables in the deal. It's not just what's the purchase price and then can you close in 30 days. There's what's the length of the lease, how much build-out allowance do you need, what are the annual increases, how much free rent, what's the build-out period, how strong of a tenant or an owner are you, what's your financial strength, what type of renewal options, what type of assignability clauses if you want to sell the practice. So there's all these variables that go into a lease that make it a lot more complicated than a residential transaction. So when we go to market for our clients, we'll look at the top 15, 20 properties or whatever's available. We'll narrow it down to the top, let's say 6 or 7 properties. We'll tour those properties, evaluate them with our client, and then we'll submit offers on 3 or 4 properties. And that's the same game plan, even if you're already in a space doing a lease renewal, because if you don't have other properties to negotiate against, you don't have any leverage. You have no basis for saying I've got better terms somewhere else. Everything is just basically a beg or a barter or a bluff.
Right.
And then this idea, landlords don't move off their best rates or their highest rates to get you the best terms unless they have a fear of loss. Like, they're not going to give you anything just because you ask them, or if they do, basically a token concession to make you think you won. So this whole concept, as far as like picking one property or negotiating, especially on a lease renewal, like you just ask your landlord to send your proposal, or what would you do if I was willing to stay? That's just fraught with error, and it's laced with just this whole idea of like, you don't know what you're doing. That's not how you're supposed to be negotiating. And landlords can pick that up from a mile away.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because I would have never, ever thought that. I find a space, I'm like, that's the space I want. And I just go in and say, okay, I want to lease your space. And they ask me for my financial information. They present me with a lease. And I think the first time I did it, I was like, okay, we're fine. Okay, that's fine. I'll pay the pay. And then down the road, then something crawls out of the bushes and bites you. And you think, wait a minute, what happened? That wasn't supposed to be there. And sure enough, it's in the fine print in the lease. So this is such a good conversation, because I don't know that I know of any healthcare provider that I work with or have worked with, including myself, that has ever had representation going into a transaction.
Yeah. And it's not just the lease rate. I mean, there's very few lease rates that are priced at the lowest the landlord will go. Typically, there's a very significant margin in there. And when you just say yes to it, like, I mean, you just bought off on paying.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and that could $2, $3, $4 a square foot higher than you should. Yeah. And then there's the misconcession side though too. Landlords will pay for long-term leases, like residential leases. People sign 6-month, 1-year terms. They'll clean the carpet, paint some walls, make sure the appliances work, like hand you the keys. That's residential. Commercial real estate, landlords are looking for 5, 7, 10-year leases. And when you give them those longer terms, they'll give you concessions. They'll contribute towards your build out. They'll give you free rent packages to offset your moving costs if you're relocating, or to offset your startup costs if it's a new practice. And so you go into an office or into a space and you don't get the 3 or 4 months of free rent that you should have received. Depending on the size of space we're talking, or the monthly rent, you can just take $5,000 a month or $7,000 or $10,000, depends on the size of the space, times that by 3, 4, 5 months. That's what you just lost. You just lost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000.
Yeah. And that's just probably one point of where that loss comes in, because then there's all those other little tiny stipulations inside the contract, as you mentioned earlier, that could also be points of loss, where you're losing leverage and losing money.
Yeah. And so, you take, 30, 40,000 here, you take an extra $2, $3 a square foot over the square footage of your space times 5, 7, 10 years, you're going to get $50, $80, $100, $200,000 very quickly. Right. And so you add all these things up. It's not an exaggeration to say if you have an average lease, like you do an average job or a poor job, you're going to lose $100,000, $200,000 like that. Yeah. If you have a larger space, it's not uncommon for that loss to get up there. Like I mentioned earlier, these doctors were losing literally $400,000, $500,000 from what they could have achieved with lower lease rates and all the other concessions. And those numbers are going back literally 18 years ago. Like, I don't know if we can say that the rents have doubled since then, but they've gone up at least probably 50%. So, nobody wants to sign a lease and then find out later that you lost $500,000, or again, even if it's $200,000 or $100,000.
That's a bad day.
Yeah.
That's a very bad day. What are the things, is this applicable? I have 2 questions, but the first one is this, I'll say, relevant or applicable for someone who maybe has a healthcare practitioner that's a really small office? So, 2,000 square feet, 1,500, 24, 3,600 square feet. I mean, relatively speaking to with commercial real estate in general, I would think that's a smaller space.
It's 100% applicable. And I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I want to clarify the numbers that I'm talking about. I'm talking about spaces that are around like 2,000 square feet or 2,500 square feet. When you get into larger practices like 8, 10,000, 12,000 square feet, I'm not embellishing this. Like, it's not uncommon for them to lose $1 million or $2 million over 10 years. Like, those larger practices, when they, again, you take 10,000 square feet, if you're overpaying by $4 a square foot over 10 years, $400,000. So, I mean, you start taking those larger spaces and concessions, and it gets crazy real quick. Yeah, this is applicable. Even if you have 1,000 square feet, the question is this: would you rather start a lease and not pay rent for the first 3, 4, or 5 months, or would you rather pay rent for the first 4 or 5 months?
Yeah.
Would you want a brand new space? You want new flooring, new paint, new lights, new window treatments, new cabinetry? Do you want to pay for all that yourself, or do you want the landlords to help pay for a portion or all of it? And so you start looking at those concepts, even if you have the capital or cash, like why would you want to spend your money if they give it to you in exchange?
Exactly. So if let's say that I have, a lease that's up for renewal in a year, it's coming up. What is the length of time that we should be thinking about working with someone like yourself to help start looking at the terms of the lease and starting in that negotiation process? How long should we start thinking about that?
Yeah, you want to start at least 12 months in advance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so that one catch people off guard a little bit because they're thinking, well, does it really take that long to negotiate a deal? No, not just to negotiate a lease renewal or a new office, but you've got to factor in if you are going to move or relocate, what does that look like?
Oh, yeah.
The entire process of building out a new space, depending on which jurisdiction you're in or what, what type of a market you're in, it doesn't take 6 months to build out a space, but it could take 6 weeks or 6 months, to have the architectural drawings done, the mechanical and engineering drawings done, submitting for permit. And it might sit on a building department's desk for a month and a half before they even look at it. The actual swinging hammers and building out a space, whether it's a pretty basic space or it's like a full ambulatory surgery center or a large dental office or a veterinary practice that has a lot of infrastructure, that still only takes around maybe 10 or 12 weeks, but it's all the time before then leading up to it. And then you still got time for installing equipment, technology, FF&E. So the whole process of that side takes, 6, 7, 8 months sometimes, depending on which type of jurisdiction you're in. And then you've got on top of that, the due diligence, the site selection, the negotiation. So starting 12 months, you got to give you that room you need and make sure that you're not running up against a deadline, because if you only have 2 months left in your lease, the landlord knows you don't have time to move. You're backed into a corner at that point.
Mm-hmm. I got bit that way one time where I was like, oh, my lease is up in 3 months. And, I'll start having a conversation with them. And it was exactly that. The landlord actually pulled that out of his hat. Much to my surprise, I'm like, hey, I'm trying to be really honest and ethical with you over here, and you're doing this to me. And, he didn't care. He just wanted me to stay. So yeah, I did get that.
Well, Rhonda, let me highlight that statement right there, because this is a very, very common theme, and this would have made my top 5 mistakes that healthcare providers make. Is you cannot just tell a landlord what you want to do or what you're willing to do. As unfortunate as that is, they will take advantage of you. And so you have to realize, put yourself in their shoes. And let's give the example. Let's say that you're selling your house. All right. Let's say you're selling your house, and let's say your house is worth $800,000. But because the market's so competitive and the market's gone up so much, inflation, your real estate agent says, hey, I think your house probably would sell for $1 million. It's only worth $800,000, but I think someone would probably pay $1 million. You're not going to walk up to a buyer and say, hey, don't submit an offer for $1 million, submit it for $800,000 because I'd take less, or it's not really worth this. You're not going to tell them anything. You're not going to give them any advice to help them. And if someone shows up with $1 million offer, even though it's only worth $800,000, you're not going to correct them. You're not going to.
100% right. I'm going to take the money and say, thank you very much. Have a great life. Bye.
Exactly. And so that's what happens is healthcare providers, in a lot of scenarios, are very ethical. They're very integrous, and they're just very forthright. They just want to have an honest conversation. They're used to dealing with people in honesty. Here's what your issue is. Here's what I recommend. And you cannot approach a landlord that way. I mean, it's just. Again, you could pick your analogy. You could talk about in sports, you can't show the other team, hey, by the way, if you see that guy right there, we're going to throw him the ball. As soon as the ball's hiked, he's going to get the pass. You can't do that. You have to make them think you're going a different direction, or you could do this. And at the end of the day, we're not lying to landlords. We're not being deceptive. You don't sacrifice your integrity, but you have to have a posture that is predicated upon having multiple viable options. And if they don't get competitive enough for you, if they're not fair enough for you, you will choose a different landlord, a different property. And when landlords have that fear of loss, that's when they come forward with their best terms. If they think, look, the space has already been vacant for 6 or 9 months. If I don't make this deal with this practice, it could sit vacant for another 6 months. Or they could vacate an existing space. It could sit vacant for 1.5 years. The next deal is going to cost me even more money. When they get that fear of loss, that's when they come forward with good terms, their best terms. But you don't get those terms if you don't have a strategy.
Yeah. And there's got to be a little pressure there. And that's where the competition of having multiple spaces that you're looking at, that's what creates some of that pressure, I'm sure. What about practices that are in, what are you seeing? Like, I'll say a strip mall, like an outside building versus like a commercial building, where you've got a 3, 5, 6, 8 floor commercial building. What are your recommendations as far as that goes?
Yeah, so we typically break down property types into 4 major categories for healthcare providers. The first one would be like a medical office building, like you're familiar with, a 3 or 4 story building. That's going to be either entirely healthcare or predominantly healthcare. MOBs, medical office buildings, fairly standard. The next one would be a retail center, like you said, could be a strip mall, could be a retail center that is like grocery anchored, has a Kroger store, or could have like a super Target or a Walmart or a large retailer there.
Right.
That's a retail property. Then you get traditional office buildings that may have some healthcare or may have no healthcare, might have CPAs and attorneys and financial advisors. And then you have maybe just kind of a one-off healthcare practice. And then the last one would be hospital campus type properties where like you're on the campus of the hospital, there's surgery centers, there's pharmacies, there's laboratory testing. That's a very specific, type of practice.
Right.
If you were an OBGYN practice and you guys wanted to deliver at this specific hospital and they're connected, that's the type of person that goes into that hospital campus. So to break it down though, about a third of all the healthcare transactions that we're involved with are going into retail properties. And so, certain types of practices, like if you're an animal hospital or veterinarian, you're not going to go into a medical building or a hospital. They won't take you typically, or you meet the zoning. And so, you're going to be in retail. A lot of the large national, like optometrists or dental groups, urgent cares, they all want retail. So there's certain practice types that lend themselves more to a retail setting. On the dental side, if you're an oral surgeon, you're probably not going into retail, you're referral based. It's not going to help you get, drive-by visibility for the most part. Yeah. So some practices thrive there. And then some people's business model, it's 100% predicated upon a big sign on a busy street with really significant, successful, busy retailers nearby.
Yeah.
But the caveat is this: it typically costs the most, not always, but typically, to go into a retail property. For that signage, that visibility, and the synergy of those other retail tenants, that's typically the most expensive rent you're going to see, outside of a couple exceptions.
Yeah, so my audience is going to be more, healthcare providers that are smaller cash-based practices, and they're chiropractors, acupuncturists, that kind of where there's going to be some street appeal there for somebody who's looking for that type of care. I would think that a retail center would be a good option, or maybe like a one-off if there's a small house, in a small neighborhood, or a smaller shopping area in a smaller demographic of a larger city. What do you see as far as that, if you were going to really narrow it down to chiropractic, acupuncture, that kind of alternative medicine?
Yeah, here's how I would tell people to approach it. And this is kind of a general answer, but it has a pretty specific application. What I would tell people is go to market and see your top options and then compare them. If you're in a certain submarket and you say, listen, this is the area that I want to practice in, this is the community that I want to serve. If you go to market, if you can get a retail space at a price that makes sense in a property that you really like, with great access, great parking, great neighboring tenants, and the rent is worth it, that's fantastic. Alternatively, you might compare that to a traditional office space, and then you have to ask yourself the question, how much more are you willing to pay for that visibility and that exposure?
Right.
That question typically will drive you one way or the other. Let's just say that the rent was going to be, let's just say $5,000 in retail, and then you go to a nice office space for $3,000. You have to ask the question, am I going to pick up $2,000 worth of profit, not just revenue, obviously, profit in this retail space? Or would I rather put that $2,000 into target marketing that I can turn on or off based upon my practice? Because you can't turn off higher rent. If you have a thriving practice and you're almost at capacity, and yes, you always want new patients, but you're not where you were maybe 5 years ago, or you've only got limited availability for growth. You have to ask the question, is it worth it to me? And so, there's a balance there. Sometimes it's maybe like not the class A retail, but a class B. It's still a nice center, but it's not Whole Foods anchored, or it's not, it's not next to Starbucks. It's a nice retail center. It's got good visibility, but maybe it's, just down the street from the nicest property. And maybe that's a good, that might be a good middle ground for you. It still has exposure, still has visibility, still has the park and drive up, walk right in, has neighboring tenants, but it's not the most expensive rent in that submarket. And so that would be a compromise as well.
Right. And I think that's true. Like I would say that for someone who's doing more of like alternative medicine or holistic medicine, lots of different names for it. But for that type of practitioner, being in a strip mall with a Target anchor or a Walmart anchor, I think those are more maybe for the walk in, like the joint chiropractic, the chains, well, there's a lot of marketing dollars going into promoting that business. These guys are small, brick and mortar. They just need their little space, cash-based practices, referral only, doing a little bit of marketing. So I think that's true. One of those, a little one-off space. It's not on the beaten path, but not too far off the beaten path as well.
Yeah. There's a ditch on both sides of the road. I mean, you can try to save so much money that you go into a location that really just does not reflect the quality there. And it's not going to, you'll capture referrals because of you as a great provider, or the outcomes that you deliver, but you're not going to capture it off of like the feel or the first impression. And the flip side's true too. I mean, we've all seen practices that overspend on rent and it's not sustainable and they're just getting buried by overhead. And yes, it's nice, but again, to me, it's kind of like, it's like a car, like an automobile, like, everyone would love to drive the Rolls Royce or the Bentley, but you can get a pretty nice Lexus or some other brand that's really quality, that's going to take care of you at the highest level. And then again, you can pick your car. I won't pick the car that someone might be driving right now, but you can pick the vehicle that just does not reflect the quality of care, and it just doesn't speak well to what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. I totally agree with that. I think that's such good insight. So. What is your, I want to hear a story. What's your favorite negotiation story where a practitioner came out like way ahead?
Oh, wow. It would be hard to pick one. And maybe let me give, I'll take my very first healthcare practice. I'll use that one. Doctor had been trying to negotiate against his landlord, large institutional like insurance company that owned the real estate, hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate in his portfolio. And the landlord basically just assumed that the doctor has no options. He doesn't know what he's doing, can't move. And so this doctor just beat his head against the wall with this landlord for like 3 or 4 months. Then finally, and thankfully, his lender introduced me to him. And we went in there, went to market, showed him other properties. They had considerable vacancy in the property, but they just assumed that this doctor didn't know the market. And we basically went to him and ran the numbers. And I sat down with the landlord and said, look, this is what it's going to cost if my client vacates the property. This is how long it's probably going to sit vacant for. Here's what you're going to lose if you don't do this deal with my client on this lease renewal. And just ran all the numbers for them. And the second the landlord saw that I knew what it actually looked like from their side, because I had done so much landlord work, I knew their side of the equation. When I ran it for them, literally one offer flipped the script, and it was like a $400,000 swing from where he was to where we ended up. And all of like the posturing, the back and forth, like literally they just, as soon as they knew that I knew how the game was played, everything shifted. Yeah. And I told him, I said, I even gave him the addresses of the other properties we were looking at. I gave him the TI allowances that other landlords were offering. And the second they knew that I knew, all of the gamesmanship was gone. And they literally brought forth this offer. It was a $400,000 swing. We tweaked it a little bit, went back one more time. And what took this doctor four plus months, and he got nowhere, we literally had figured out like in a 2-week period. And it was one of those things where he was obviously ecstatic about it. And again, that's going back 17, 18 years. But that was one of the other transactions on the positive side for me. I gave the negatives earlier. That was one of the positive ones where the light bulb went off for me. And so that's probably one of my more memorable ones. And
wow, $400,000 is nothing to shake a stick at, for sure.
No, again, it's
a huge savings.
Cost of money back 18 years. I'll take $400,000 today, let alone, but 18 years ago, that's probably
a lot of money. That was a really lot of money. Yeah. And that's a lot of revenue you have to bringing in the door. Profit, not revenue, profit in the door in order to make up for that over the cost or the term of the loan.
Yeah, I always make that clarification because, even if we're talking $50,000, it's not 50,000. It's what's your profit margin, and then that's the number that you have to extrapolate it out. If you're running a 25-cent profit margin on every dollar, you make a $50,000 mistake, you got to produce 200,000 to pay that $50,000 mistake.
So true. Yeah, I said loan, I meant lease, but you knew what I meant. But yeah, that is just really true. And I don't think we think about that. We just go in like I did. I walk in, I'm like, oh yeah, I like the space. It's pretty. It looks good. It smells good in here. It's got nice carpet. I like the cabinets in the kitchen, and I can see myself in the space, so I'll take it. Yeah. And that landlord was probably laughing all the way to the bank every month when he took my check.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No. Again, having been on the landlord side prior to starting our current company, they'd ask me questions. They'd ask me, does the tenant have a broker? And the second that you answer that question, no, everything shifts as far as how they're going to approach that negotiation. Mm-hmm. So the three questions that I would always get asked by my landlords are, do they have a broker? Do they know the market? And what are they willing to do? Like on a lease renewal, are they willing to move, or do they understand what it's going to cost them to move? And if you hit them with no, and no, I mean, you're just setting yourself up to get taken advantage of at a very high level.
Well, you make a very compelling case, and one that I don't know that I had ever thought of before. And I'm like looking back at my leasing history, thinking, "Dang, how much money have I lost over the years?" So I'm quite inspired and motivated. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How can our listeners get a hold of you? How's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The best way to get in touch with our team is our website, and it's carr.us. So carr.us. And then upper right-hand corner on the nav bar, you can click to find an agent in your state or your city. You can ask someone to do a free lease evaluation. You can do a purchase versus lease analysis for you.
Nice.
Wherever you're at, you basically just start a conversation and say, look, I've got a lease coming up. I like to buy a property. Or you can even say, look, my lease isn't up for 8 years. I'm just curious how my current lease compares to the market. We'll be more than happy to run those numbers for you. We can do it very quickly. So anything that you need, whether it's an actual transaction, that's coming up soon, or if it's in the future, but you just want that peace of mind, or you want to change the game plan of your trajectory for the future, we'll engage you, we'll start the process, and we'll make sure that you're in touch with someone who's a seasoned pro at what we do.
I love that. And you mentioned, we didn't even touch on that here in the podcast, but you mentioned about how the distinction between do I want to lease or do I want to buy? And, buying that building, and I imagine that there's those same types of negotiation that has to go into it where you need representation. But I do love that you are healthcare practice focused exclusively. That's what you do. So you understand where we're coming from, what our numbers look like, what kinds of businesses that we have, and then help us be able to negotiate those leases so that we don't lose money like I did because it had pretty cabinets. I tell you, I'm a girl at heart.
Purchasing commercial real estate can be one of the greatest assets you own. And it's 85-90% of the time, the real estate's worth more than the practice is worth.
Yeah.
So, as real estate keeps getting more and more expensive as it has, over a 15, 20-year period of time, if you have the ability or the wherewithal to purchase that real estate, that can be one of the greatest investments you ever do.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Colin, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me. I will make sure that we link everything in the show notes so that they can find you and connect with you. And I hope that you continue to grow as you expand it out across the United States. That's pretty awesome. I do love that. And I can tell you that I will be using you. So I will be reaching out very soon.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Colin. Take care. Well, listen, if that was not a little bit of I don't know, for me, it was kind of like us getting smacked up on the side of the head with a 2x4. I went, oh, geez. I was the sucker that they were looking for. I was coming right at them. So I thought there were so many great tips and tidbits that Colin shared. So I would really encourage you, no matter where you are in your journey, if you are a brick and mortar practitioner, if you're virtual, obviously this doesn't apply, but if you are a brick and mortar practitioner, I would really encourage you to go to Colin's website, carr.us, and just go to his website and at least talk with somebody and you'll find out, because what if there is money left on the table for you, my friend, or you're thinking about expanding or growing or moving into a different space? What if there's money left on the table and they could help you find and save that money in a lease renegotiation? So go visit them. I have no interest in this at all, other than I'm just here to help you. I want to serve you and help you be a great business owner, smart, savvy, and keep as much of that income as you can, but yet serve your patients with authenticity and integrity. All right, friends, Take care. I'll see you next week on the podcast.